Chapter 12 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 12 A Tempting Offer. Naturally, under the pressure of Ida's imploring letter, Colonel Towton was not anxious to remain inactive in London. He wished to go to Bowderstyke himself and learn the exact truth. Maunders said one thing and Ida another, so if the two were confronted the absolute facts of the case would certainly come to light. Towton assuredly believed Ida rather than Maunders, but it seemed strange to him that Miss Hest should champion Constantine, and strange also that Maunders should wish him to come down to Gerby Hall, where, if Ida spoke correctly, his presence would not be welcome either to Miss Hest or her co-conspirator. And Maunders was far too clever a man to do anything without having some object in view. What that object might be, Colonel Towton as yet could not fathom. For this last reason, and because his rival so pointedly advised him to go to Gerby Hall, the Colonel remained in London. Whatever Maunders' plans might be, they would assuredly be thwarted by the absence of Towton, and, later, the Colonel determined to go, even before Vernon lured Diabella from her hiding place. Meanwhile, as Maunders had stated that he was himself going to Gerby Hall on the invitation of Miss Hest, the Colonel sought the young man's rooms on Sunday afternoon in order to see if he had kept his promise, as he fancied that the proposed visit might be some trick. On inquiry, however, the Colonel learned that Constantine had departed on the previous day, and had left notice with the caretaker of his chambers that he would not return until an entire week had elapsed. Evidently he had meant what he said, namely, to accept Miss Hest's hospitality. This knowledge, however, only made Towton the more anxious to go also, as the idea that Maunders was having it all his own way and was subjecting Ida to persecution made him restless. He wished to ride forth like a knight of old to rescue his lady love, who certainly, if her letter was to be believed, seemed to be in great peril. It said a great deal for Towton's disciplinarian instincts that he obeyed Vernon, as one more professionally clever at such cases, rather than his own desires. In the meantime, having satisfied himself with regard to Maunders' whereabouts, the Colonel took up his usual life for, at all events, a week. He relieved his mind by writing to Ida saying that he would come down to The Grange at the termination of that period. Vernon had not thought fit to impart to Towton how he proposed to inveigle Diabella into the open, for the very simple reason that he was puzzled himself how to act. Several times he had been to the Bond Street rooms only to find that they were in the hands of decorators, rapidly transforming the weird Egyptian hall into a cosy English cottage. Mrs. Hiram G. Slocum was already advertising that Granny would foretell the future, after the fashion of the renowned Mother Shipton, and already had seen several of Diabella's old clients, desirous of novelty. To these she told wonderful things in a strong American accent, which did not suit the thrum cap, or the tartan shawl, or the general looks of an ancient rustic dame. However, she was succeeding very well, and there was no doubt that when her mise en scène was prepared that she would become the fashion for a few months. She professed to know nothing of Diabella, and as she was quite frank in answering questions, Vernon saw no reason why he should not believe a story which certainly appeared, on the face of it, to be true. The lawyer of the landlord still refused to say anything about Isabella Hopkins, since Vernon declined to state why the knowledge was required. And of course, as he was suspicious rather than certain, he could say absolutely nothing. In this dilemma, and wondering how he was to come face to face with the woman, Vernon decided, on the Sunday when Towton went to seek Maunders, to pay an afternoon call. This errand took him into the luxurious drawing room of Lady Corsoon. By this time the month of grace allowed by the Spider was nearing its end, and Vernon, having accomplished nothing definite, considered it necessary to reassure the millionaire's wife. Naturally, he expected to find her haggard and hysterical, but was truly surprised to behold a perfectly composed person, comely and content. Her brown eyes sparkled when the footman announced the newcomer, and she swept forward the word is necessary to exactly describe Lady Corsoon's imposing gait to welcome him with ill concealed eagerness. "How are you, Mr. Vernon?" she asked in her best society manner, and then dropped her voice to a confidential whisper. "I should have called at your office to morrow had you not come." "I am quite well, thank you," replied Vernon for the benefit of the surrounding guests, and lowered his voice likewise. "Any news, good or bad?" "Yes, both. Wait till everyone goes," she said softly, and again spoke gracefully in her character of hostess. "You poor man, you must really have a cup of tea. Go to Lucy and ask nicely." Vernon needed no second command, but thrust his way through a crowd of well dressed people to find a bamboo table covered with tea things, over which a pretty fresh coloured damsel presided. She received him with a shy blush which made her look like a dewy rose. Lucy Corsoon could not be called lovely, nor would she have attracted attention in any marked degree. A bright, sweet English girl was all she claimed to be, and, having the bloom of youth, she really appeared more charming than she really was. In a very plain white frock, without a single ornament, she looked like a modest violet, almost hidden by its leaves. The ardent gaze in her lover's dark eyes made her blush more than ever as she handed him a cup of tea. "Without sugar?" she said in a gentle voice. "I know your tastes." "Who else should?" inquired Vernon smiling, and sipped his bohea. "This tea is delightful and exactly what a thirsty man requires." "I hope you are hungry also. Mr. Hest, please pass the cake stand to Mr. Vernon." The lover wheeled when the name was mentioned, to find himself facing the counterpart of Ida's companion. He would have guessed the relationship even if Lucy had held her peace. Mr. Hest smiled at the amazed look of the young man, and swung forward the bamboo cake stand with a soft laugh. "Don't say what you are going to say, Mr. Vernon," he remarked pleasantly. "I know exactly how astonished you are to see that I am so like my sister." "You are indeed," breathed Vernon, mechanically taking bread and butter. "I should have taken you for Miss Hest in disguise but for " he hesitated. "But for this scar," finished Hest, laying a finger on a cicatrice which ran in a thin crimson line from the right temple to the corner of the mouth. "I got that in Paris years ago. The knife of an Apache scored me in this way. It is just as well, if only to distinguish me from Francis. I rarely come to London, but when I do everyone stares at me as you did." Mr. Hest shrugged his shoulders. "It's rather a nuisance being a twin." "You are not so tall as your sister," ventured Vernon, while Lucy laughed at the idle jest of the Yorkshire squire. "There's very little difference. Frances looks taller because she wears petticoats. If I dressed in her clothes and could hide this," he laid his finger again on the scar, "you would not be able to tell the difference." "Your voices are different," said Vernon after a pause. "I really begin to think you must be a detective, Mr. Vernon, since you are so very observant. Yes, our voices are different, and in the wrong way." "The wrong way?" "Ah, you are not so observant as I thought. Yes, Frances has a deep contralto voice, somewhat heavy for a woman, whereas my voice, as you hear, is rather thin in quality. Nature mixed up the voices as we are twins, maybe." It was as he said. Hest's voice had not the volume nor the richness of his sister's, but it certainly had a less serious note. Vernon, recalling what Towton had told him of Ida's remark in her letter as to Frances being dismal and misanthropic, wondered that she could have been so mistaken. He was really more cheerful than Frances, and did not seem to treat life in her aggressively sober manner. Besides, that he was a philanthropist was in itself an argument against his being of a gloomy disposition. Vernon judged that Mr. Hest was much more of an optimist than was his sister, and that he lacked in some measure that sterling common sense which, to put it plainly, made her company rather dull. If Francis had been the man and Frances had been the woman, their temperaments would have suited the change of sex ever so much better. But perhaps, as Mr. Hest just observed, since the two were twins, nature had got mixed. Vernon would rather have spoken to Lucy, but could not do so, and every now and then fresh guests came to be served. He was therefore left to the society of Hest, and took advantage of the opportunity to learn if the man was in love with Ida. "Did you leave Miss Dimsdale in good health?" he asked.
"Oh, yes. She is ever so much brighter, Mr. Vernon. The air of our Yorkshire moors has picked her up wonderfully, and has brought colour to her cheeks."
"And your sister?" Hest shrugged his shoulders again.
"Oh, Frances is always in robust health, Mr. Vernon. I find her company too exhausting for my health. She always wants me to be doing something or saying something, and is never at rest."
"You do a good deal yourself in the way of philanthropy?"
"Well, I do," said Hest, his dark face lighting up, "but it is really selfish on my part. There is nothing I love so well as to help the unfortunate. I have quite changed the parish of Bowderstyke, and instead of being a Rip Van Winkle sort of place, it is now in lively touch with the 20th century. If you are ever down our way, Mr. Vernon, come and stop at the Hall, and you shall see my opus magnus, the Bolly Reservoir. Miss Dimsdale was quite amazed when she beheld the strength of the dam."
"I have heard of that great work from your sister. She was quite enthusiastic over the enterprise."
"What? Frances enthusiastic over anything of that sort? You surprise me, Mr. Vernon, you do, indeed. Frances cares nothing about such things. Poetry and society and a general aimless life is her idea of living. But then she is a woman, and we must not be hard on women."
"It's strange," said Vernon musingly, with his eyes on Hest.
"What is, if I may ask?"
"The life you mention would suit your nature rather than hers, I should think, considering what I have seen of both of you. You are not so serious as Miss Hest, so far as I can judge."
"Well, you see, Frances takes her pleasures seriously and in a very ponderous manner. I take my work lightly and as a hobby. That is all the difference, save that I am sure I get more amusement out of life than she does. Wait till you hear us argue."
"You are stopping in town long?"
"Only for a few days. I may go to Paris, or I may go to Gerby Hall. It all depends upon Miss Dimsdale."
Vernon looked surprised. "On Miss Dimsdale? In what way?"
"Well," Hest hesitated, "it's rather a private matter to—"
"Oh, I beg your pardon."
"Not at all. You know Frances and Miss Dimsdale so very well that I don't mind telling you. The fact is, my sister thinks that I ought to be married at my age. I shan't tell you how old I am, because that would give away Frances, who, like all women, doesn't want her age to be known. But the long and short of it is that she wants me to marry Miss Dimsdale. I saw very plainly that Miss Dimsdale didn't want to marry me, so I ran away."
This explanation appeared to be clear enough, and Vernon drew a long breath of relief. Ida had been right. Frances had wished her brother to marry the girl and secure the fortune. Now that Francis declined to entertain the idea, Miss Hest had invited Maunders down to try his luck. But Vernon could not see what interest the former could have in bringing about the marriage with the latter. He lifted his eyes from the carpet again to address his companion, but found that Mr. Hest had slipped away to talk to an old lady with an ear trumpet. "You might speak to me," hinted a low voice at his ear, and he turned to smile at Lucy's injured face. "You are so busy." "There is a lull now in the tea drinking. Why haven't you been to see me lately, Arthur?" "I have been very busy. Also I have been out of town." "You should be with me always," pouted Miss Corsoon. "What would your mother say to that?" he asked, smiling broadly. "She would be annoyed," returned Lucy promptly. Vernon started. "Surely you are mistaken," he said anxiously, stopping to almost whisper in her ear. "Your mother gave her consent, and when I was last here she said in your presence that she did not mind my—" Lucy interrupted with a flush. "I think she has another opinion now. For some time she appeared to be pleased that we should marry, but the day before yesterday she hinted that there might be obstacles." "Ah, your father?" "No. Mother can manage father in any way not connected with money. Mother has changed her mind on her account." "But for what reason?" asked Vernon, much perplexed. "I wish you could find out," mourned Miss Corsoon. "She refuses to tell me in any way. But I love you, and I won't give you up.
I'd run away with you if you were not so poor." "Shortly I'll be poor no longer," said Vernon quickly, "and then we can run away whenever we like." "You will be poor no longer?" questioned Lucy doubtfully. "No, dear. My uncle, Sir Edward Vernon, of whom we spoke when I was here last, has become reconciled to me and has made me his heir. I shall have the title and something like 3,000 a year." "Oh, how delightful! But perhaps it's wrong to say that, since it means your uncle's death." "I think Sir Edward will be glad to go," replied Vernon candidly. "He has lived a long life, and the latter part of it is very weary and dreary. He told me himself that he was looking forward to the great release." "And then you will be rich?" "Yes, and you will be Lady Vernon." "It seems too good to be true." "I don't think so, dear. Even your father can scarcely object to our marriage when I have an assured position." Lucy looked down at the teacups. "It's mother I'm thinking about." "I shall see Lady Corsoon before I leave," said Vernon, compressing his lips and sending a glance in the direction of his hostess. She caught his eye and smiled graciously, so graciously indeed that he bent again down to Lucy. "You must be mistaken, darling," he whispered. "Your mother is quite friendly, and I am sure will not object in any way." "She has changed her mind," answered Miss Corsoon obstinately. "At least she told me not to count on marrying you." "Strange. She gave no explanation?" "None, and was quite cross when I asked for one." This view of Lady Corsoon's attitude was supported by the fact that on seeing Vernon conversing so earnestly with Lucy, she called to the girl to come to her. Ostensibly this was to present her daughter to a fashionable countess who had lately arrived, but Vernon guessed that she really wished to end the tête à tête. This was curious, considering the conversation he had held with his proposed mother in law at the office of Nemo. It was evident that she had changed her mind once more, and as Lady Corsoon was not a weathercock, Vernon wondered what powerful cause would have brought about the alteration. However, he gave up speculation as he wandered about the room, speaking to his friends and promising himself a full explanation when the company departed. As Lady Corsoon had asked him to remain, it was evident that she intended to let him know what was the matter, and Vernon determined not to leave the house until he did know. Shortly the young man was captured by a flippant lady, voluble and somewhat silly, who gave him a surprising piece of information. "Oh, Mr. Vernon, I am so glad to see you," she babbled gushingly. "You really must come to the bazaar, the great bazaar." "Never heard of it, Mrs. Crimer." "You silly man, don't you read the papers? One of the princesses is to have a stall, and no end of actresses and society people. It's to be held at the Georgian Hall in aid of homeless Hindus." "Really," said Vernon idly. "Why are they homeless?" "Oh, I don't exactly know," gushed Mrs. Crimer vaguely. "It's a flood or a fire or a blizzard." "I don't think they have blizzards in India." "Perhaps they don't. How clever you are, Mr. Vernon. But all I do know is that the poor things want money, and we hope to make heaps by this bazaar. There will be lovely things sold, and games, and flower stalls, and sweets, and fortune telling," babbled the flippant lady incoherently. "Fortune telling?" Vernon, paying little attention, only caught the last word with any degree of clearness. "Of course. What would bazaars be without fortune telling? And this time it's really genuine. Diabella—" "What?" Vernon spoke so loudly that several people jumped, and the flippant Mrs. Crimer put her gloved hands to her ears with a pretty gesture of pain. "You dreadful man, how you bellow! Yes, Diabella has a tent in the grounds at the back of the Georgian Hall. We hope it will be a sunny afternoon, you know, and intends to charge everyone 10 shillings. You know she usually charges a guinea, but I think we'll get more by asking less." "But I thought," Vernon carefully commanded his voice, "I thought that Diabella had retired from business." "So she has. That delightful granny has taken her business. I'm going to see her and ask about my affinity." "Your husband?" "Oh, no," said Mrs. Crimer airily. "He's only my husband, you know. But I must have an affinity, someone who is a spiritual lover. And Granny—" Vernon restlessly cut her short.
How did you get Diabella?"
"Really, I don't know," murmured Mrs. Crimer vaguely. "Some one asked her, or she asked herself, I don't know which. But she is to be there in her Egyptian dress and wearing an Egyptian mask and in an Egyptian tent. Do go and have your fortune told."
"I shall," said Vernon grimly, and inwardly rejoicing over the chance that was placing Diabella in his power. "And do you?"
"No." Mrs. Crimer spread out her hands with a shrug. "I really can't talk to you any more. Everyone is going, and I have heaps and heaps of dear, delightful people to see. Good bye. So glad you will come to the bazaar. Quite angelic it will be. Quite."
And the flippant lady babbled her way to the hostess, who was now taking rapid leave of her various guests. Lucy had disappeared, as Vernon soon learned by a glance round the room, so he sat down and waited until Lady Corsoon could give him her promised 10 minutes' explanation. He would have liked to have had a chat with Sir Julius, if only to enlist him in favour of the marriage by dropping a hint regarding the expected inheritance. But the financier rarely put in an appearance at his wife's "at homes," finding them far too frivolous for a man of his capacity. So Vernon decided that if Lady Corsoon's explanation did not prove satisfactory, he would interview Sir Julius and formally ask for the hand of Lucy. With the credentials of a soon coming title, a lordly mansion and 3,000 a year, he hoped to have his proposals well received. At a former interview the baronet had scoffed at his pretensions, but now things were changed for the better, and the chances were that all would go well. "Now, Mr. Vernon," said Lady Corsoon, when the last guest had shaken hands and departed, "we are alone and can have a talk. What news of your search?" "I have no news," replied Vernon, placing a chair for the lady. "The Spider cannot be found." "Only 7 days remain, and I must give my answer then, Mr. Vernon. You know the terms. Either I pay £2,000 or my husband," she winced, "is informed that I sold those family jewels to pay my bridge debts." "I am sorry, Lady Corsoon, but as yet I have not caught the man." She made a gesture of despair. "Oh, what is the good of being sorry? I came to you as a practised detective." This time it was Vernon who winced. "At least, Mr. Maunders assured me that you were," she hastened to say. "Very kind of Mr. Maunders," said Vernon sarcastically. "Go on." "Well, I came to you for assistance, and you have done nothing." "I have done everything that I could do," said Vernon drily, "but The Spider is too clever for me. As he has baffled the entire police force, it is no shame for me to confess as much." "What do you intend to do?" "I can't say," said Vernon, thinking of a possible meeting with Diabella at the homeless Hindu's bazaar. "In a few days I may have news." Lady Corsoon shook her head. "I can't afford to wait, since the time is so short. Of course you know that your marriage with Lucy depends upon your getting me out of this unpleasant position." Vernon felt inclined to say that she had placed herself in the said position, but he restrained himself, as it was useless to make an enemy of her, and merely bowed. "Very good," went on the lady sharply. "If you can't catch this Spider and close his mouth, and regain those jewels which he got from the pawn shop, you don't marry Lucy. In any case, you are not a good match." "I am now, Lady Corsoon. My uncle has been reconciled to me and has made me his heir. Soon I shall be Sir Arthur Vernon with a good income." "Oh, my dear man," Lady Corsoon waved a jewelled hand impatiently, "there are plenty of baronets and knights with moderate incomes who would be glad to marry Lucy for herself, let alone her expectations from her father. My conditions are that you should get me out of this trouble. Can you?" "I shall try. I can say no more." "Then listen to me," said the lady firmly. "A few days ago I received a letter from The Spider." "Ah!" Vernon nursed his chin and swung his leg. "So that is why you have changed your mind with regard to my wooing of Lucy." "Who told you that I had changed my mind, sir?" she asked abruptly. "Lucy hinted something, and then I saw that you separated us in " "There, I understand." Lady Corsoon waved her hand again. "You are right. I have changed my mind, as The Spider has given me another chance. But, of course, if you can catch him and make him hold his peace,
and can recover the family jewels I pawned, I am willing to keep to my agreement with you and support you in marrying my daughter."
"The Spider has given you another chance," repeated Vernon sitting up. "And what may that be? Have you the letter?"
"It's locked away, as I did not expect you to day. I did not put it in my pocket. But I can tell you what he says."
"The Spider?"
"Yes, of course," said Lady Corsoon quickly. "He tells me that if I pay him £10,000 in 12 months, he will place me in receipt of that amount a year by proving that I am entitled to my late brother's money. Strange, is it not, since my niece Ida is Martin's daughter?"
"Very strange," replied Vernon mechanically. This news proved to him more conclusively than ever that Diabella was connected with The Spider, and if not the blackmailer herself, worked in concert with him. But until he could lay his hands on the woman he determined to say nothing to Lady Corsoon about the matter. "How long does he give you to answer this new demand?"
2 months," said Lady Corsoon triumphantly, "so at least I have gained time, and much may happen."
"As you say, much may happen. How does he propose to place you in possession of this income? Does he say?"
"No."
Lady Corsoon wrinkled her brows.
"He simply makes the offer. Certainly Ida inherits as next of kin, but it may be that this Spider, who seems to know everything, has found a will giving the income to me. Then," she hesitated, "there is another condition."
"What is it?"
"One you won't like. If I get this money, I am to consent to the marriage of Lucy with
"With whom?" asked Vernon jumping up. "Don't keep me in suspense."
"With Constantine Maunders," said Lady Corsoon coolly.
Chapter 12. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 13 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 13. The Bazaar. For the next few days Vernon vainly grappled with the new problem which Lady Corsoon's information had supplied. That the Spider should offer the millionaire's wife a fortune of £10,000 per annum on condition of receiving the income for the first year scarcely surprised the young man, for he already suspected The Spider to be connected with Diabella, if indeed the creature was not that famous individual herself. But it seemed odd that the arch criminal should interest himself in Maunders' affairs, even to assisting to bring about the marriage with Lucy. Could it be possible that Maunders was one of the gang? Vernon recalled that after Mrs. Bedge's confession of poverty he had suspected Maunders in this respect, since the young man apparently contrived to live like a prince on nothing a year. He did not receive much from his aunt, and he did not earn an income, so it was possible that in some shady way he managed to become possessed of sufficient money to gratify his extravagant tastes. Maunders also, being in the vicinity of the library on the occasion of the conversation with the late Mr. Dimsdale, must have heard the suggested arrangement of the trap. But then, as Vernon recalled, Miss Hest had stated in quite an innocent way how Maunders had been with her all the evening, and could not thus have had anything to do with the crime at "Rangoon." Vernon's suspicions had been banished by Miss Hest's assertions, but they now revived in full force after Lady Corsoon's communication. He had made her show him the letter, and it proved to be similar to the earlier epistle of The Spider, even to the ideograph at the end. Apparently it was genuine enough, and, if genuine, Maunders must be connected in some way with the blackmailer. No other explanation was feasible. Had Maunders been in London, Vernon would have gone straight to tax him with his possible complicity, but the young man was at Bowderstyke, and so, for the moment, could not be questioned. But sooner or later he would return to London, and then Vernon intended to force him to explain. Meanwhile it seemed best to seek out Diabella at the bazaar for the homeless Hindus, and threaten her with arrest unless she explained how she had come to let the Spider know Martin Dimsdale's secret. Also she might supply the connecting link between the Spider and Maunders. Vernon was rather surprised at Diabella's daring in thus making a public appearance, but he supposed that his ruse had been successful, and that the fortune teller, not having been openly searched for, presumed that Colonel Towton had taken no steps. If she had learned that Towton was to be at the fête, she might have declined to risk exercising her profession, but she had no reason to believe that he would be present, and thus dared the danger. But, never suspecting Vernon, he could enter the tent and tear off her mask, which was what he intended to do at the first opportunity. The young man hesitated whether to tell Inspector Drench or to remain silent until more satisfied as to the hidden connection between Diabella and The Spider. After reflection he decided to carry through the matter himself. By removing the waxen mask he would at least learn what Diabella was like, and perhaps, if brought to bay, she would speak out to save her skin. Then, when he knew more, he might venture to call in the aid of the police. It was a dangerous business, and perhaps Vernon would have been better advised had he taken more precautions against the woman's escape. But the evidence against her was so vague, and there appeared to be so much to clear up, that he doubted if Drench would be able to arrest her on the bare suspicion. At all events, after turning the matter over in his mind, Vernon started by himself for the bazaar, resolved to act on his own initiative. He told no one of the second letter from The Spider to Lady Corsoon, not even Colonel Towton. So that military gentleman, ignorant of what was taking place, lingered in his chambers or idled at the Athenian Club, fretting over his inaction and longing for some chance to display his generalship. A very natural feeling, considering the Colonel's active mind. The Georgian Hall was a huge repository of Hanoverian relics in South Kensington, and consisted of many moderately large apartments, encircling a spacious central room. This was used for concerts, balls, meetings, fêtes, and such like entertainments requiring ample scope for their celebration. The minor halls were dedicated to the display of objects connected with the rule of the House of Brunswick, and dating from the reign of the first monarch of the dynasty. Memorials of warfare on land and at sea were here, together with pictures of famous events, and collections of old world things dealing with social life of the various epochs. One room was filled with figures representing the male and female garbs of the different reigns. Another displayed china and silver and glass of the several periods, and a third room held quaint furniture, recalling the tales of Jane Austen. The political and social and military history of England was contained in the museums, and from this fact the hall took its name, since the objects dated only from the Act of Succession. It was an interesting place, and well worth the patronage which it received from the idle public. On this occasion the central room was filled with gaily decorated stalls in divers colours, on which were displayed modern luxuries likely to appeal to the purses of the self-indulgent. Society beauties, charming actresses, and celebrated lady novelists presided over the booths of this Vanity Fair, and did a large trade by their fascinating personality alone. Vernon, accurately dressed as became a young man about town, managed to elude these sirens, who would have cajoled every shilling out of his pocket, and walked into the grounds at the back of the hall, where, Mrs. Crimer had informed him, the tent of Diabella was to be found. It was a sunny afternoon, as the flippant lady had desired, and the spacious gardens looked extremely pretty with flags and tents and flowers and general greenery. Games of all kinds were going on, and the place resembled a fair with its crowd of laughing people who were enjoying themselves thoroughly. So far as could be judged, the homeless Hindus would benefit largely by the bazaar, as it apparently was a great success. No prettier function had taken place during the season. Vernon saw endless friends and acquaintances, as many fashionable folk were present. But, taken up with his own anxious thoughts, he spoke to no one. However, some one spoke to him as he threaded his way amongst the throng, for a friendly touch on his shoulder wheeled him round to behold Francis Hest. He looked more like his sister than ever, and decidedly handsome in his immaculate frock coat, grey trousers, patent leather boots, and silk hat.
The only fault which Vernon, always rather fastidious, could find in his general appearance was that he wore his hair much too long, which gave him the look of a poet, or of a fashionable musician, and the full black locks added still more to his resemblance to Frances. "I did not expect to find you here, Vernon," said Hest after a handshake. "Why not? It's one of the entertainments of the season, and everyone who is anyone is bound to patronize it." "I should have thought it was too frivolous for you." "Oh, I assure you I am a very frivolous person," said Vernon smoothly. "Is Colonel Towton?" asked the other smiling. "And is he here?" Vernon wondered why the question was asked. "Towton is certainly not frivolous, but he enjoys society and is usually to be found everywhere enjoying himself. Do you know him?" "No. I am an innocent countryman who knows no one in the fashionable world except Lady Corsoon, who is a host in herself. I asked out of curiosity, as having heard Miss Dimsdale speak of the Colonel, I should like to meet him." "Oh, she spoke of Colonel Towton, did she?" "Is that strange?" asked Hest, smiling again and showing his white teeth. "I rather think Miss Dimsdale admires the Colonel." "He admires her and wants to marry her," said Vernon bluntly. "So I should imagine. Another reason why I did right in running away from Gerby Hall and in declining my sister's help in marrying me to the lady. I think, however," added Hest significantly, "that unless the Colonel looks to his bride he will find she is likely to become Mrs. Maunders." "I should be sorry to see that." "Why? Don't you like Maunders?" "Oh, yes. We were at school together. But I believe that Miss Dimsdale is in love with the Colonel. You know, of course, that Maunders has gone down to your place?" "Certainly. Frances wrote me that he arrived on Sunday morning. That is why I advised Colonel Towton to look after Miss Dimsdale." "Why does your sister wish Miss Dimsdale to marry Maunders?" asked Vernon in a pointedly blunt way. Hest raised his thick dark eyebrows. "Ask me another," he said. "All I can say is that Frances is a great matchmaker. Failing me, she suggests Maunders as a suitor. He is younger than the Colonel, I believe." "And much handsomer. But he is not Towton's sterling character. By the way, have you met Maunders?" "Twice. Once in town and once at my own place. I confess that he doesn't attract me greatly. Handsome, yes, but there is something dangerous about him." "Dangerous?" Vernon looked straightly at the speaker, wondering how he had chanced to hit on the very defect which spoilt Maunders' charm. "It's the only word I can think of which describes him, but perhaps I am wrong. Frances would think so." "I always thought that Miss Hest did not like Maunders." "It may be so," said Hest indifferently. "Still, he is handsome, and Frances is a woman. It seems to me, however, that the word rests with Miss Dimsdale. If she loves Colonel Towton, she will marry him. If Maunders, he will win her. A wilful woman will have her way." "I do not think that Miss Dimsdale is wilful," said Vernon stiffly. Then, with an afterthought that Hest might help the Colonel to thwart the plans which Frances certainly appeared to entertain, he added, "Would you like to meet Towton?" "Oh, yes. I shall be in town for a week before going to Paris. I have few friends here and like to be amused." "Where are you staying?" "At Professor Garrick Gale's, Isleworth." "Oh!" Vernon could scarcely conceal his surprise. "I thought that you did not approve of your sister appearing as a reciter." "Nor do I," rejoined the other man with a frown. "But Francis asked me to deliver a message to Professor Gale, whom I met before and whom I like. He asked me to accept his hospitality while in London, so I did so, as I hope to induce him to get Frances to abandon this scheme of earning money by her talents, which, by the way, I don't deny, so that she may resume her proper place in society as my sister." Vernon shook his head. "Miss Hest is of too active a mind to bear tamely the life of an ordinary country lady." "She is singularly obstinate, if that is what you mean," said Hest with a curling lip. "However, that is my address, so if you can arrange a dinner with Colonel Towton I shall be glad to meet him and to give him the latest news of Miss Dimsdale." "Thank you." Vernon booked the dinner. "Say, next Wednesday?" "That will suit me capitally. The day after to morrow? Well, and what are you going to do now?"
"Just wander around," replied Vernon evasively. He did not wish to disclose his plans regarding Diabella to the Yorkshire squire. "Good day."
"Good day,"
said the other in a friendly tone, and the two were soon separated by the ever moving crowd. It was growing late by this time, and the gardens were not nearly so filled as they had been. Already there was a shade of twilight in the calm sky, and several lamps had been lighted. It was necessary to see Diabella at once, for it might be that she would not be present in the evening. Vernon therefore went to seek for the Egyptian tent, and soon found it standing in an isolated position at the far end of the ground. With some skill the canvas had been erected into the square form of a Memphis temple, and this, coloured like stone and adorned with gaudy hieroglyphics, looked a striking object in the waning light. Two imitation sphinxes guarded the doorway, and beside these, on either side, stood two men like bronze statues with folded arms. One was slender and the other burly, and both were natives of India in spite of their Egyptian array. Vernon, knowing what he did know, had no difficulty in recognising Bahadur and the heavier man who had attempted to strangle the Colonel, until prevented by his mistress.
"Can I see Diabella?"
he asked, approaching slowly and addressing Bahadur as the more amiable looking of the two.
"1, 2, 3," said the man, showing his teeth and throwing up triple fingers. "3 to see mistress, then you."
Vernon nodded, and resting on his cane, stared at the merry scene in an idle manner. But his thoughts were taken up with the probable scene which would ensue when he tore the mask from the woman's face. He wondered if she would make an outcry and would summon her attendants, and if so, would the sullen looking wrestler attempt to choke him. But Vernon resolved at the moment he removed the mask to intimate that he knew of the assault on Colonel Towton, and so hoped that the woman would not risk unpleasant discoveries by making an outcry, but would be willing to talk calmly. If so, then he hoped to induce her to state how she came to be possessed of Martin Dimsdale's secret. And here again, as it always did, came the thought that Diabella might be a disguise for The Spider, in which case she would surely decline to incriminate herself. If she did, and refused to be frank, there would be nothing for it but to see Drench and procure her arrest. For the moment, and now that he was on the very eve of the enterprise, Vernon regretted that he had not brought the Inspector with him so that he might be legally supported by the arm of the law. But it was too late for such regrets, and when he arrived at this point of his meditations, Bahadur lifted the curtain which formed the door of the canvas temple to intimate that the stranger might enter. The interior of the tent was adorned as an Egyptian hall, much in the same way as the Bond Street rooms, save that the mummies were absent. Diabella, in the weird dress described by Towton, sat stiffly in a chair, with a small table at her elbow. The cards and the crystal and various charts bearing astrological figures were on the table, together with a boat-shaped lamp. This gave out a fairly strong light, and Vernon could see plainly the expressionless waxen mask which covered the face of the fortune teller. She looked like a sphinx, solemn, calm, and passionless. Yet below that non-committing mask, Vernon guessed, was the face of the true woman, alive with passion and intrigue. He saw two glittering eyes scanning him curiously from the shadow of a black veil which the seeress wore draped over her Egyptian headdress, and shivered a trifle at the uncanny look. The sorceress saw the tremor. "Are you afraid?" she asked in her metallic voice, which was as expressionless as her mask. "I am afraid of nothing," replied Vernon boldly and coldly, "but the night air strikes chill." He thought that he heard a sarcastic laugh, but it was so soft that he well might have been mistaken. However, thinking that the prophetess was sneering at him, he might have ventured on some angry remark, but that he recollected his intention and drew back with a grim smile. The laugh would be on his side when the mask was torn off. "You wish to have your fortune told?" asked Diabella coldly, and stretched out her hand. "Let me read your palm."
That was just what Vernon desired, as the grip brought him within snatching distance of the mask. There was a stool near at hand, upon which Diabella motioned that he should be seated. So shortly he was sitting, so to speak, at her feet, with his hand in hers. Shadows filled the corners of the tent and enhanced the grotesque looks of the figures painted on canvas. The laughter and chatter of the diminishing crowd without had died away into a faint and confused murmur, and in the vivid circle of the lamplight sat the two figures. Diabella, holding back her veil, bent over Vernon's hand in silence.
"You are coming into good fortune," she said thinly. "Yes, here is the line which foretells money and position. One near to you, if not dear, is on his deathbed, and you benefit by his decease. Am I right?" She raised her glittering eyes again to peer into his face. "If you are certain of your craft, there is no need for you to ask if you are right," said Vernon composedly. He was well aware of how fortune tellers gain more knowledge than they impart by such dexterously put questions. Diabella gave a very modern shrug, quite out of keeping with her dress and mien. However, she made no reply and continued her reading. "There is marriage here," she continued in a low voice, "but you have a rival."
"Will he be successful?"
"If he chooses to be."
"That is untrue," contradicted Vernon, nettled. "The lady loves me."
"It is questionable, questionable," muttered the woman hastily. "Your rival is a formidable one, and not easily turned from his purpose. Look at the break in the line yourself." She handed him a magnifying glass. "That means trouble before you achieve your heart's desire."
"Can you tell me what my heart's desire is?" asked Vernon, after a glance through the glass.
"A lovely, wealthy wife and a happy home."
"Quite so, but I have a stronger desire."
"To do what?"
"Ah," said Vernon sarcastically, "that is for you to say. But my second desire, which is marriage, is contingent on my first being realised."
I see," said Diabella, raising her voice, which whistled shrilly like the wind through a crack. "You have to save someone from disgrace before you can marry the girl you love."
"Is the someone a woman or a man?"
"A woman, and closely connected with the girl you wish to marry."
"Is there any chance of success?"
"None, none."
"Then I shall not marry the "
"You may marry, for the line of Venus is strongly marked," interrupted Diabella sharply. "The girl loves you, and may defy the person with whom she is so closely connected."
"And my rival also?" Diabella shook her head.
"He is too strong for her. He can force her to marry him when he chooses."
"Perhaps he may be forced to defend himself," said Vernon incautiously. Diabella looked up quickly.
"What's that?"
"Never mind. If you can read events, you must guess what I mean."
"I can only read what is in your hand, and all that a man plans and thinks may not be written there. Still, you will be wise to leave your rival alone, for he is too strong for you."
"I don't think so, knowing what I know."
"What do you know?"
Diabella's metallic voice sounded somewhat nervous, and she dropped Vernon's hand to clasp her own on her lap. "I know," said Vernon, bending closely towards her, "I know that my rival will marry neither Ida Dimsdale nor Lucy Corsoon." Diabella shrank back and gripped the arms of her chair.
"The names are not familiar to me," she breathed in a low voice.
"Think again. The first name is familiar, surely," mocked Vernon.
"Why should it be?"
"Colonel Towton might be able to answer that." Diabella rose suddenly, tall and straight, from her chair, and threw out her arms with a repellent gesture.
"I do not know the name of Colonel Towton."
Vernon rose slowly and measured his distance carefully. "You seem to forget a great deal, madam," he said softly, his fingers itching to tear off the expressionless mask.
"I never ask the names of my clients," she mumbled.
"How do you know that Colonel Towton was a client of yours? I never told you."
"I guessed. That is help!" She shrieked loudly, and with good reason. Vernon's hand had shot out while he kept her attention engaged, and in a moment he had ripped the mask from her face. Head dress and all came away in his grip, and Diabella covered her face with her hands. At her shriek the fold of the tent door was torn open and the burly Indian appeared. Vernon flung aside the mask and veil and head dress and seized Diabella's wrists as the Indian ran forward to aid her. "I must see who you are," cried Vernon, and pulled her hands away. "Maunders!" He fell back a step and into the arms of the Hindoo. It was indeed Maunders whom he beheld, shrinking back into the shadows with a furious, shameful face, startled as a trapped animal. Vernon had no time to see more, for the Hindoo made a clutch at his throat, silent and venomous. Mindful of how Colonel Towton had been assaulted and Dimsdale killed, the young man turned fiercely to grapple with his assailant. As the two men closed in what promised to be a deadly struggle, Maunders recovered his presence of mind sufficiently to dash over the lamp, and the tent became pitchy dark. In that Cimmerian gloom the combatants swayed and swung and fought with silent earnestness. But the Hindoo was the stronger of the two, and Vernon felt the lean, long fingers grip his throat with vicious strength. He faintly heard Maunders, now at the door, hurriedly call to the native in an unknown tongue, and, fearful lest the two villains should escape, he tore himself away with a violent effort, crying as loudly as he could for assistance. The next moment his opponent flung himself forward and, picking him up as though he were a child, dashed him with a gigantic force to the ground. His head struck the turf with a thud, and everything was swallowed up in blank insensibility. End of chapter 13. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 14 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 14 Run to Earth. In half an hour, more or less, Vernon came to himself slowly and opened his eyes in a bewildered manner. He was in complete darkness, and for the moment could not remember where he was or what had taken place. Gradually memory returned to him, and he sat up painfully to recall details. His head throbbed with the violence of the fall, and the short, sharp struggle had set his nerves jangling like ill-tuned bells. Rising to his feet with an effort, he wondered why the Indian had not finished him off, then recollected the rapid words of Maunders in an unknown tongue. Probably he had been speaking Tamil, and had ordered the man not to go to extremities. As in the case of Colonel Towton, when the creature had been warned by Diabella, or rather by Maunders as in this instance, the native had stopped short of actual murder. In Maunders' desperate enterprise it was necessary that he should remain on the right side of the law. Striking a match, Vernon ascertained that he was still in the tent, for its blue glimmer showed the figures and hieroglyphics weirdly flickering on canvas walls. Apparently the criminals, for they were nothing else, had fled, leaving him insensible, and Vernon wondered that he had not been discovered. But when he walked outside he saw on the door a notice stating that the booth was closed for an hour, and guessed that in this way Maunders had provided time for flight. So warned, no one would enter the tent, and evidently both the noise of the struggle and his cry for assistance had passed unheeded. Vernon drew a long breath and stood where he was, watching the crowd of people merry-making under hundreds of coloured lamps, quite oblivious to the fact that a tragedy had nearly taken place under their very noses. He wondered what was best to be done. It was useless to go to those in authority at the Georgian Hall, as no one would credit his wild tale, although the flight of Diabella and her accomplices might lend colour to his narrative. Moreover, Vernon decided that more than ever was it necessary to hunt down Maunders in secrecy, as he wished for a full explanation from him before calling in Drench to assist. Likewise, for the sake of Ida, of Mrs. Bedge, and Lady Corsoon, Vernon wished if possible to avoid publicity,
since any scandal would certainly bring their names into unpleasant notoriety. For these reasons the young man left the Georgian Hall without telling anyone what had happened, but he chuckled as he went to think how the public would be disappointed to find the tent of the sorceress empty. Also, how amazed those managing the bazaar would be to discover that Diabella had vanished with her takings for the day, which would be considerable. Vernon felt quite sure that a man so unscrupulous as Maunders would not hesitate to seize the till, seeing that, having been exposed, and doubtful if his old schoolfellow would hold his tongue, he would want all the money he could get to assist his flight. The question was to learn whither he had fled, and what track to follow in order to hunt him down. It was close upon 7 o'clock, and outside the Georgian Hall Vernon hesitated as to his next step. He wondered whether it would be better to go home and retire to bed, since he felt shaken by the struggle, or to seek out Colonel Towton and enlist him as a fellow pursuer in the manhunt. Finally he decided to take a taxi to the Colonel's chambers and relate what had happened, for he knew that unless he discussed the matter he would only worry the whole night over the catastrophe. He therefore fortified himself with a stiff brandy and a soda at a near hotel, and pulled himself together for a serious conversation. And serious enough it would be for Constantine Maunders, who could not be permitted to continue in his nefarious career. As it happened, Towton, late in dressing for dinner, had not yet left his rooms for the Athenian Club. Vernon arrived at 7:45, just as the Colonel opened the door. The two came face to face with mutual joy at greeting. "My dear Vernon, I am glad to see you. I am simply dying to have a talk, as I can do nothing but think of the entanglement in which we find ourselves."
"You can't be more pleased than I am at having found you, Colonel. I have had an adventure with Diabella."
"The deuce! Have you learned who she is?"
"Who he is, you mean? Yes. That mask concealed Constantine Maunders."
Towton sat down on one of the hall chairs and stared.
"Do you mean to say that the young scamp has been masquerading as a woman?"
Vernon nodded and sat down wearily, for his bones ached.
"I presume he thought that there would be less danger of discovery if he changed his sex. I expect he wore those long Egyptian robes over his ordinary clothes. When discarding them he would reappear as Maunders, and could easily escape without being noticed in the crowd. He's clever, is Constantine, and yet not clever enough."
"I don't know what you're talking about,"
said Towton gruffly, and rising to his feet.
"Suppose you come with me to the Athenian and tell me all about the matter."
"I'm not in evening kit."
"Oh, the deuce take that," said the Colonel cheerfully.
"And I'm rather knocked up with my fight."
"Fight? Did Maunders show fight?"
"No, your Hindu did. He assaulted me as he did you, and left his job unfinished in the same way. It's a long story, and I want your assistance. Go and have your dinner, Colonel, and I'll lie down on the sofa in your sitting room until you return."
"Pooh, pooh! I can't eat with such news as this exciting me."
Towton threw off his coat and hung his silk hat on a peg.
"Come into the sitting room and I'll send my man to the nearest restaurant for a meal. Meanwhile, you'd better have a peg, for you look as white as a winter's day."
"No, thank you, Colonel. I had a brandy and soda just after leaving the Georgian Hall," said Vernon as they entered the sitting room.
"Have you been there? At the bazaar?"
"Yes. Diabella had set up her tent there, and was telling fortunes. I heard of this at Lady Corsoon's the other day, and so ventured to beard the lioness in her den."
"And the lioness turned out to be a lion," chuckled Towton, throwing himself into a chair, after making the sofa comfortable with cushions for his guest. "Well, we'll have the whole story after a makeshift dinner, for, hang it, your disclosure has taken away a very excellent appetite. Bendham!"
The Colonel turned to the retired soldier who acted as his valet, and who had just entered the room.
"Go round to the nearest restaurant and tell them to send in the best small dinner they have, for two. Look sharp now. You can lay the cloth in the smoking room. We'll make shift there."
Bendham saluted military fashion and took a speedy departure, while his master turned his head in the direction of Vernon.
"Tell me all that has happened to you now," he said easily.
It will be some time before the dinner makes its appearance, and I'm on tenterhooks. The deuce! To think that our blackguard friend for he is that, I swear should be earning his money as a fortune teller. It's worse than " Towton hesitated. "Than my profession of a detective, you would say, Colonel?" finished Vernon languidly. "I would rather think so. I assist the law and Maunders breaks it. But neither profession is tempting to a gentleman." "Oh, hang your profession," said Towton impatiently. "You will soon enter into your kingdom when Sir Edward gives up the ghost, and it's just as well that you have some experience in thief catching, seeing what scoundrels we have to deal with. Maunders, by Jove! Now we'll be able to find out how he came to know that Ida wasn't Dimsdale's daughter. No wonder he decided to give her up, seeing that he was after the money. What did he say?"
"Nothing. He cleared out of the tent as soon as I discovered his identity."
"Where is he now?" demanded the Colonel sharply.
"I don't know. That's what I wish to speak to you about. And to make things quite clear, as I want your opinion, you had better hear the whole story."
Towton intimated his desire to be informed of what had taken place, and listened attentively while Vernon detailed all that had happened since Mrs. Crimer had informed him of Diabella's proposed appearance at the bazaar. He ended with a description of his recovering from insensibility in the deserted tent, and his subsequent decision to consult the Colonel before taking any steps.
"And my reason for wishing to move quietly is obvious," was the concluding remark of the young man.
"Yes, yes, I quite understand. We must keep Miss Corsoon's name and that of Miss Dimsdale out of the papers. By the way, what did this fellow mean by hinting, in his confounded fortune telling, at disgrace to someone closely connected with Miss Corsoon? Does he mean her mother or her father?" Vernon felt a trifle confused. In his interest in the recital he had unconsciously let slip more than he had been prepared to impart. Both as a detective and as a gentleman he was bound to keep Lady Corsoon's secret, and as the disclosure of it was not particularly pertinent to the matter in hand, he brushed aside Towton's question with a scornful laugh. "Oh, I daresay that was all patter. Maunders knows that I love Lucy, and thought to intimate to me by a threat that he had power to force the mother to support his preposterous claim to marry the girl. But after this exposure he will scarcely dare to come forward." "The blackguard!" cried the honest Colonel heatedly. "He blackens the character of both man and woman in his endeavours to earn his dirty money. But I thought he was supposed to be at Gerby Hall."
"Oh, he doubtless arranged that so as to provide himself with an alibi."
"Why the deuce should he provide himself with an alibi?"
"Can't you see how Maunders must be The Spider?" said Vernon impatiently.
Towton leaped to his feet and began to walk to and fro, much perturbed. "Oh, impossible. I don't like Maunders. All the same, it seems incredible that he should be a murderer."
"I can't see that myself," said Vernon drily. "Maunders is half a Greek, and is as wily as a bird as ever had salt put on its tail. Whether he gets it from his Greek father or from his English mother I can't say, but he certainly has that strong criminal taint which induces him to get money for his whims by illegal methods rather than by honest toil. Besides, we can't say if he killed Dimsdale, even though, as is apparent, he is The Spider. Miss Hest declared to me in all innocence, and not with any intention of defending him, that Maunders was with her nearly all the evening."
"Then he can't be The Spider," insisted the Colonel, "for undoubtedly The Spider killed poor old Dimsdale."
"So we thought. So everyone thinks. And yet well, of course, it's not impossible that Maunders ordered this nameless native to get the money, and the man may have executed the murder without instructions."
"Or else," said Towton emphatically, "Maunders may have had his mask torn off by Dimsdale when he came for the money, and murdered the old man to prevent discovery. It cuts both ways."
"Pardon me, no, if Miss Hest is to be believed."
"I don't trust that woman," said the Colonel abruptly.
"She is scheming to get Ida to marry her brother. I think she will fail there, as the brother is in London."
"What?"
"Yes, I met him both at Lady Corsoon's and at the bazaar. He said that his sister did wish to bring about the match, but that, not being desirous of marrying Ida, he ran away from the Hall."
"Leaving the field clear for Maunders?"
"You forget that Maunders is in town masquerading as Diabella."
"He may have come up for that purpose."
"Well, we can ascertain that from Mr. Hest. He declares that he left him at Gerby Hall, or that Maunders was expected, I forget which. But we'll see him to morrow and ask."
Towton shook his head wisely. "He won't know of Maunders' movements."
"You never can tell. At all events, it will do no harm to ask him. Now I come to think of it," said Vernon musingly and searching his memory, "Hest told me to day at the bazaar that he had received a letter from his sister saying that Maunders had arrived on Sunday morning. That was yesterday, so it is impossible to believe that Maunders went down and came up in such a hurry. It's my opinion that he never went to Gerby Hall at all."
"And I say, by Jove," cried the Colonel, greatly excited, "Hest told a lie if he said that he received the letter saying that Maunders had arrived. Even if posted in Bowderstyke last evening, it could not reach him before to night. And you say he gave you the information this afternoon."
"He may have received it at midday."
"No," said Towton excitedly. "Our post at Bowderstyke is very uncertain, as I know to my cost. This evening or to morrow morning is the very earliest that Hest could receive a letter posted on Sunday, and as Maunders did not arrive until then, Miss Hest could not have written before."
"I don't believe that he arrived at all, and I can't conceive why Miss Hest should tell a falsehood."
"I can. She's scheming for this money. However, I shall go with you to morrow, and we'll have it out with Hest. Where is he to be found?"
"He is staying with Professor Garrick Gale at Isleworth."
"The deuce! Ida told me that he did not approve of his sister's reciting."
"Nor does he. But she asked him to give some message, and the Professor asked him to stop at Isleworth while he was in town. He did so, as he explained to me, so that he could persuade the Professor to induce Miss Hest to give up her career."
"A very lame explanation," said the Colonel grimly. "Gentlemen don't stay at such places for such weak purposes. I tell you, Vernon, that I don't believe in those Hests. I never did, although you defended the sister. They had a bad name at Bowderstyke as a wild family."
"Oh, I thought that Francis Hest was looked upon as a benefactor."
"He is," admitted the Colonel reluctantly. "He's a crazy philanthropist with his parish schoolhouses and Bolly Reservoir. All the same, there's a queer taint about them, and they live queer lives."
"I can't see that. Francis recites in London in a perfectly open and honest way, and Francis acts in a noble manner as a philanthropist."
"I daresay. All the same, I don't trust either brother or sister. They quarrel like mad, too."
"Most families do," retorted Vernon drily, as he swung himself off the sofa. "And Frances is certainly trying to further her brother's interest by securing him an heiress. That doesn't look as though they quarrelled."
"H'm," said Towton disbelievingly. "Probably the sister has learned that Ida isn't an heiress and wants to do her brother a bad turn. However, it's no use talking as we get no further. Let us see Hest to morrow, and then learn, if we can, the whereabouts of Maunders. All depends upon the confession of that scamp. But I tell you what, Vernon, if our young friend is this poisonous beast of a Spider, he would have left England by to night's mail."
"Perhaps, but I could not stop him without consulting Drench, and that means the interference of the police, which we wish to avoid."
"It's a damned tangle altogether," muttered Towton savagely. But here comes Bendham to announce dinner. Come and eat. To morrow we can talk further." Vernon was quite willing to drop the subject for the time being, as his head and limbs still ached with the struggle, and he felt more inclined to go to bed than to sit discussing criminal trickery, which required a very clear brain. Even at the makeshift dinner, which after all was dainty and tempting, he was unable to eat much, and excused himself to his host as speedily as he could, consistently with politeness. After arranging to meet the Colonel next day at 3 o'clock at Waterloo Station, he went home. A warm bath took the pains partially away, and he was so tired that almost as soon as his head rested on the pillow he dropped into a profound sleep. Not a single dream broke his rest, which was prolonged to 10 o'clock the next morning. While at breakfast, which he devoured with an excellent appetite, Vernon recollected that he had not Professor Garrick Gale's exact address. It was at Isleworth that he lived, but it was necessary to find the street and number of the house. This was quickly learned from an Era which he sent his servant to buy, and he ascertained that the retired actor dwelt in Siddons Villa, Petterby Road. Vernon rather regretted that he had not made the appointment with Colonel Towton earlier, since Mr. Hest might have gone out for the day. However, he comforted himself with the reflection that in any case Hest and Towton would meet at dinner on Wednesday. Meanwhile, there was always the chance that the Yorkshire squire might be at Isleworth, and in any case Vernon felt curious to see where Miss Hest lived when in town. Like the Colonel, he was beginning to mistrust that young lady. Punctual to the moment, Vernon arrived at Waterloo Station, but found Towton before him. They greeted one another cordially, and Towton congratulated his friend on his improved looks. And certainly a night's rest had done wonders for the young man. He felt, as the saying goes, fit as a fiddle, and quite looked forward to the visit.
"And I sincerely trust that Mr. Hest is at home," he said anxiously.
"We can wait for him if he is not," said the Colonel, shouldering his umbrella in soldier fashion. "I don't leave until I have seen him, that's all. In one way or another I intend to have these infernal mysteries cleared up." "Upon my soul, sir," said the Colonel bluffly, "I feel as though I were bathing in dirty water."
"You are not used to the seamy side of life, as I am," replied Vernon as they passed the barrier and stepped into the train.
"No, by Jove, sir, I'm not. And once I'm married to Ida I shall take care to leave all this sort of thing alone. Not the thing for a gentleman by any means. You chuck it also, Vernon."
"I intend to when my uncle dies. Once let Sir Arthur Vernon come into existence with a good income, and Nemo vanishes for ever."
The Colonel nodded his approbation, and the two chatted about their errand on the way to Isleworth. But all they could do in the absence of positive fact was to theorise, which was unsatisfactory. But they hoped, when they laid hands on Maunders no very easy matter since the scamp had taken the alarm to have everything cleared up. Vernon still held that his former friend was The Spider, but Colonel Towton disagreed. "No, no, no," he said decisively. "Maunders may be bad, but he isn't a murderer."
"He's anything that suits his purpose, so long as he isn't found out," was Vernon's retort. "He's clever."
"And cunning, but he isn't bold, and would be sure not to bring himself within reach of the hands of justice by bloodshed."
"He has brought himself quite close enough in other ways," replied Vernon.
In this way they talked, and in due time arrived at the charming suburb of Isleworth, which looked quite countrified. The two descended the steps and passed along a narrow path which led out of the station into the road. An inquiry from a passing butcher boy on a bicycle soon advised them of the whereabouts of Petterby Road, and shortly they found themselves facing a double fronted house with a small and neglected garden between it and the quiet side road. "The sluggard's domain," said Towton with disgust, for like most military men he was excessively tidy. "Might be made pretty if attended to, by Jove."
"I don't think retired actors go in much for gardening," said Vernon with a smile as he reached for the knocker. A stout woman, with the remains of heavy good looks, opened the door with the air of a tragedy queen, although her dress was scarcely regal. Vernon asked if he could see Mr. Hest, and received in reply the negative, as it seemed that Mr. Hest was absent. "But I anticipate that he will return at a comparatively early hour," said the lady grandiloquently. "Can we see Professor Gale?" asked Vernon, determined to enter the house and wait for hours if necessary. "Professor Garrick Gale," said the lady, giving him the entire name with the air of a Siddons, "is resting prior to going later to the Curtain Theatre. But if your errand is pressing—" "Yes, it is. Please give the Professor my card." "I am Mrs. Garrick Gale, formerly Miss Hetty Montgomery," said the lady in her haughty tones, "and I do not convey messages.
Maria," she beckoned to a small servant whose not very clean face peeped under her substantial arm, "convey this intimation to your master. Gentlemen," she flung the door open grandly, "enter and repose yourselves in the drawing room." Vernon smiled at the tinsel majesty of the actress, but the Colonel, without moving a muscle of his good looking face, marched in stiffly. Shortly they found themselves in a tawdry room of no great size, crammed with theatrical photographs and furnished in a poor, pretentious manner, which revealed poverty while it aped the genteel. Mrs. Garrick Gale, formerly Miss Hetty Montgomery, conducted them in with the air of one accustomed to the centre of the stage, and then departed, stating that her husband would shortly do himself the honour of waiting on them. "What airs!" murmured Towton, recalling his Shakespeare indistinctly. "An intolerable quantity of sack to a pennyworth of bread." "These actors and actresses are always in the glare of the footlights," said Vernon, sitting down cautiously on a shaky chair. "By the way, Colonel, if I do a little business with the Professor, don't look more surprised than you can help." "Business? What business?" "I intend to ask if Miss Frances Hest is open to an engagement. It is necessary, since both you and I are beginning to mistrust that young lady, to be diplomatic." "That means you mistrust this actor also, and wish to throw him off the scent?" Vernon nodded. "Exactly. And hush!" He stopped and composed his features as the door opened and Professor Gale stalked into the room, like the ghost of Hamlet's father. Anyone could see at a glance that the man was an actor. He was tall and lean and solemn, yet with a twinkle in his deep sunken eyes which showed that he could play comedy as well as tragedy. His bluish jowl, from frequent close shaving, his long hair, his measured gestures, and his lordly gait, all revealed one who was used to the world behind the curtain. His voice was deep and sonorous, and his enunciation almost too perfect. Nor did he clip his words colloquially, but gave them their full length and full meaning. Finally, he had a certain dignity, habitual to one who played many a kingly part in his time, and who in ordinary life found it difficult not to relapse into blank verse. "Colonel Towton, Arthur Vernon," he read from the pencilled card. "These are your names, I take it, and your business, gentlemen?" "Well, we are killing two birds with one stone," said Vernon easily, as the actor sat down in a regal manner as though the arm chair were a throne. "My friend here wishes to see Mr. Hest." "He is absent for the moment, sir, but will return anon. Will you wait, or will you leave a message?" "I prefer to wait," said Towton stiffly, as he did not like the atmosphere of the company. "When do you expect Mr. Hest back?" "Well, sir, he may return in 20 minutes, or in 60, which is to say, on the hour. As my guest, he has full freedom to go and return when he desires. I am content that you should remain, and if any refreshment—" "Thank you, no," interrupted the Colonel hastily but politely. "It is well. And you, sir?" The Professor turned to Vernon. "Nothing for me, thank you. I have called both to see Mr. Hest and yourself, sir, as I wish to engage Miss Hest to recite at the 'At Home' of a friend of mine, Lady Brankworth. Perhaps you know her?" "Well, I know her well. I have superintended amateur plays in her drawing room on more than one occasion. Ah, so she desires the services of my talented pupil. And on what date?" "Thursday week, I think, but I'm not sure. I shall have to see her again, and then can let you know. Miss Hest is away, I fancy." "In her ancestral home in Yorkshire," said the actor, rolling his words out grandly. "But she'll return shortly, and will be delighted to accept of the engagement, provided the fees—" "Those will be all right, Professor. Lady Brankworth pays liberally." "And so she ought, to secure the services of Miss Hest. I assure you, sir, that I have rarely come across a lady who recites so nobly. If she would only pay attention to her art, instead of indulging in social frivolity with that unfortunate young lady who lost her father at Hampstead, She would become one of our greatest actresses."
"I fashion her brother does not wish her to go on the stage," said Vernon.
Professor Garrick Gale waved his hand and then thrust it into his coat in Napoleonic fashion. "He is prejudiced, prejudiced. I would he were on the stage himself, if only because he resembles his sister, my talented pupil, so closely. As Viola and Sebastian in Twelfth Night, they would take the town by storm. Always provided," said the old actor with another wave, "that Mr. Hest has the same talent in measure as his sister has, a fact I am by no means sure of." "They are very like one another," broke in Towton coldly. "For that reason I wish both were on the stage to play in twin parts," replied the Professor in his most stately manner. "They are as like as two eggs, as you observe, sir. But Mr. Hest thinks little of our glorious profession, and is staying here in the vain hope of inducing me to persuade his sister, my talented pupil, to surrender the laurel wreath of the stage. Needless to say, I decline to commit so great a crime." How long the Professor would have gone on descanting on the histrionic capabilities of Francis Hest it is hard to say, but his eloquence was cut short by the entrance of Mrs. Gale, who swept an apologetic curtsey to the gentleman for her sudden appearance. She then whispered to her husband, and Vernon caught a word or two about "a bill, a man at the back door, must have his money," etc. Gale looked perturbed and rose quickly. "A small domestic concern, gentlemen," he said, stalking to the door, followed by his wife. "Excuse me while I adjust matters. I shall return soon," and he made his exit with Mrs. Gale in a most approved stage fashion. When they were alone the Colonel asked the question, "Can you get this engagement for Miss Hest?" "Oh, yes. Lady Brankworth is a great friend of mine, and is always giving parties. There will be no difficulty in my making good my word. The old man seems to be all right, and his wife also. Whatever devilry the Hests may be up to, that worthy couple know nothing about it." Scarcely were the words out of his mouth when the door opened quickly and a man entered the room in great haste. Vernon sprang to his feet. "Maunders once more!" he cried. "The very man I wish to see." And Maunders it was, looking like a trapped tiger, furious and despairing. Chapter 14. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 15 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 15 Face to Face. Maunders recognised his peril in a moment and immediately turned to retreat, but Vernon was too quick for him and leaped between him and the door. When it was closed, and Vernon had his back against it, Maunders glanced desperately at the one window of the room. Here Colonel Towton, now on his feet, barred his way, so there was nothing for it but to surrender to a strength he could not fight against. With extraordinary self-control the scamp pulled himself together and demanded in a surly tone what his captors meant by behaving towards him in this way. "Sit down," said Vernon without deigning to reply directly. "You have to explain matters before you leave this room." "I have nothing to explain," muttered Maunders doggedly, but nevertheless judged it wise to obey. "You had better take care what you are about." "I'll take care of myself, and of you also," replied Vernon composedly. "I ask you, Colonel Towton, if this is the way for one gentleman to treat another," demanded the trapped rogue. "Two gentlemen," corrected the Colonel coldly, "who are dealing with a confounded scoundrel." "I'll make you pay for those words," threatened Maunders, biting his lips. "I don't recognise your right to demand satisfaction, as I only deal with gentlemen. Mr. Vernon and myself have run you to earth, and " "How did you find out that I was here?" interrupted Maunders curiously. "We did not expect to find you here," said Vernon, still with his back to the door and keeping a watchful eye on his former friend. "We came down on other business connected with Mr. Hest." "With Hest?" Maunders appeared perturbed. "What do you know about him?" asked Towton sharply, and noticing the change of expression. "I know nothing, save that he is stopping here." "And how do you come to be in this house?" "That's my business," retorted Maunders doggedly. "Your business is our business," interposed Vernon quietly. "I fail to see that." "You fail to see a good many things. But don't be afraid. I shall make everything clear to you in good time." "Are you here as my old school friend," said Maunders, whining sentimentally, "or as Nemo the detective?" "You will soon learn. But of one thing you may be certain, that I am no friend of yours. Can you wonder at it, seeing what I discovered yesterday?" "I can explain everything." "Good. Colonel Towton and I await your explanation." Maunders again cast a look at the door and window and again saw that there was no hope of escape. "What do you wish to know?" was his sullen request. "In the first place, how you come to be here." "That's easy. I started on Saturday to go down to Yorkshire, as I told you how I intended to go, but news came back that my aunt was ill and wished to see me at once. I turned back at the station and went to Hampstead. Then I met Hest at the bazaar yesterday." "Does he know that you are Diabella?" interrupted Vernon quickly. "No, he doesn't. I met him before I went into the tent to do business. He asked me why I had not gone down to Yorkshire, and when I explained he asked me down here. I came last night and remained the night. It's all fair, square and above board with me." "That's a lie," said Vernon impulsively, "and Hest told me another one at the bazaar. He could not have seen you between the time I departed from him and came to you when you were masquerading as Diabella, yet he told me that he had received a letter from his sister saying you were in Yorkshire. And you didn't come down here, I take it, to talk Shakespeare and musical glasses. There is something between you and this man Hest, and between you and Professor Gale, no doubt." Maunders rose suddenly and spoke with great earnestness. "I assure you that Gale knows nothing more than that Hest asked me to stay as his guest. He will be here soon, and I beg you to say nothing to him of what you have discovered. I shall explain everything to your satisfaction before you leave this house." "On that condition," said Vernon, making a sign that Towton should be silent, "we will say nothing to the Professor. I believe I hear footsteps, so no doubt he is coming." Vernon moved away from the door. "If you try to escape, Maunders, I'll break your leg with a bullet." And he pulled out a neat revolver which he concealed in his hip pocket. "Rather melodramatic," sneered Maunders with a shrug. "However, you need not be afraid. I'll sit here quietly enough." "You have more cause to be afraid than I have. Hush! Here is the Professor coming," and as he spoke the door opened to admit the old actor. "Mr. Maunders has just come in to keep us company while we wait for Mr. Hest," said Vernon in an easy tone. "Yes," said Maunders, who by this time had recovered his composure. "We are old friends and have much to talk about, so don't let us keep you from your afternoon sleep, Professor." "If you will not think me lacking in courtesy," said Gale in his stately manner, "I shall certainly retire. The brain," he tapped his forehead, "needs rest, and I have invariably found that sleep, as Shakespeare says, knits up the ravelled sleeve of care. Will you have any refreshment, gentlemen?" "No, thank you," replied Vernon politely, "but it is growing dark, so perhaps you will order lights." "Yonder lamp is ready for use," said the Professor, pointing to the corner near the fireplace, "and certainly it is growing unusually dark, although it is scarcely 5 o'clock. A fog is descending on the verdant earth." He went to the window and looked out. "Yes, a dense fog. Have you noted, Mr. Maunders, how rapidly these autumnal fogs descend on London?" "Yes, but I should have thought that you were too far away to have them here," replied Maunders in an easy conversational tone, which did great credit to his powers of self control. "No, sir, no. The fuliginous haze does not spare even our rural suburb, if I may so term it." He swept aside the curtain with a tragic gesture. "Mark how the cloudy mists, darkened with smoke, swallow up house after house and road after road. Mark how a brown pall is drawn over the fair green looks of the earth, and how the—" "One would have to be in a balloon to see all that," said Maunders rudely. "I hope you won't mind, Professor, but I have private business to discuss with my friends here.
If Mr. Hest comes in, please tell him I shall see him in his bedroom as soon as my friends go."
"Do nothing of the sort, Professor," snapped the Colonel. "I have come here to see Mr. Hest, and he must meet me in this room." But the speech of Maunders had offended the touchy old actor. "I have nothing to do with these things," he said, stalking towards the door, "and in the good old English fashion my guests are at liberty to act as they please. Mr. Hest need be told nothing, and when he returns he will certainly enter this room, as is his custom."
"But," began Maunders, only to be cut short by the indignant Professor.
"You are not my guest, sir, but the guest of Mr. Hest," he said in his deepest tones, "and you have told me to leave my own room. These manners are suited to the Hyperboreans of the far north."
"I wish to explain."
"Explain nothing, sir," cried Gale in the ponderous manner of Dr. Samuel Johnson. "You may have a front like Mars to threaten and command, but I am no menial to be so hectored." He swept an imaginary mantle over his left shoulder and mouthed blank verse. "We must not stint our necessary actions in the fear to cope malicious censurers. Therefore," ended Mr. Gale, returning to prose, "I shall retire to my couch, and so good day to one and all." When he had made his exit, for it could scarcely be said that he took his departure in a conventional manner, Maunders gave vent to a weak, tittering laugh, doubtless to cloak the real nervousness he felt. "The old fool," he observed, with his characteristic shrug. "Let us hope you will not prove to be a young one by withholding from us the truth of this shady business you have been engaged in," said Colonel Towton in a caustic manner, for his sympathies were with the retired actor.
"Thank you, I don't wish to receive any compliments," sneered Maunders, "and for heaven's sake let us get this business over at once. I have more to do than to explain my private affairs to interlopers."
Vernon laughed as he saw that under his air of bravado Maunders was intensely anxious about his position.
"That cock won't fight," he said coolly. "You must be aware that you are in a very dangerous position." "I am aware of nothing of the sort. I can justify myself." "Do so, as regards your masquerading. Is it a crime to earn an honest livelihood?"
"Honest!" said Towton with scorn. "But let that pass."
"Fortune telling is as honest as your detective business," said Maunders insolently to Vernon. "I am Diabella. Why should I deny it?"
"You can't, or you would. But to dress up as a woman!"
"I didn't," denied Maunders with a scowl. "I simply wore those Egyptian robes over my ordinary clothes, and the waxen face to conceal my face. Also, all that rotten paraphernalia seems to be necessary to the business." "I daresay to deceive people," said Vernon drily. "Why did you act in this way, may I ask?"
"Because I couldn't get my mother to allow me sufficient money to live on." "I thought that Mrs. Bedge was your aunt," put in the Colonel quickly.
"So she is, but I am likewise her adopted son. She kept me short, and I had to earn my money somehow. For 3 years I had masqueraded as Diabella. I don't mind if you do tell, as no one can say a word against me."
"I can," said Towton grimly. "You employed your servant to strangle me."
Maunders shook his head violently. "I did nothing of the sort. Hokar—" "Is that the native's name?" interposed Vernon suddenly. "Yes. I had 2 native servants, Hokar and Bahadar, and they are both devoted to me. When you, Colonel, tried to pull off my mask, naturally Hokar intervened to prevent your doing so. In the same way, Vernon, he punished you for using violence towards me, and I prevented the faithful fellow from strangling you both. So you have your lives to thank me for."
"Why didn't you prevent him from strangling Dimsdale?" asked Towton.
"I swear that Hokar had nothing to do with that murder, nor had I." "Of course you would say that for your own safety," said Vernon contemptuously. "But how was it that you became possessed of Dimsdale's secret?" Maunders hesitated. "I am not bound to answer that," he said defiantly. "If you don't answer me, you will answer Drench," threatened Vernon firmly. "Drench? You would not dare bring him into this matter." "Why not? Dimsdale was blackmailed on account of a certain secret, and because he would not pay, perished by violence. You know this secret, so the inference is that you—" "That I ordered him to be strangled," finished Maunders calmly. "How can that be, when Hokar was never near Dimsdale's bungalow in his life? and certainly, as I was with Miss Hest nearly all the evening, I could not have committed the murder myself." "That remains to be proved," rejoined Vernon, suppressing what Miss Hest had told him of the young man's movements on the fatal night. "And even presuming you are innocent of the actual crime, and that Hokar was not near the house, The Spider, who came to blackmail, must have learned from you the secret which he threatened to disclose." Maunders was silent for a moment. "You can't prove that I knew about this secret," he said doggedly. "Colonel Towton can swear that he heard it from Diabella, and I can prove that you are the fortune teller. These facts only admit of one interpretation, Maunders. Either you are an accomplice of The Spider, or you are The Spider himself." "It's a lie! It's an infernal lie!" cried Maunders, greatly agitated. "It's the truth, and you know it. Your face reveals the truth." "How can you tell when we are nearly in darkness with this fog?" asked Maunders between his teeth. "I can see well enough, and the darkness is easily remedied. Colonel, will you please light the lamp while I keep an eye on our friend here?" Maunders cursed his former schoolfellow ardently, while Towton quietly lighted the tall lamp which stood in the corner. The light soon glowed through a rosy shade, adorned in a tawdry manner with artificial flowers, and Vernon stepped up to Maunders. The scamp met his scrutiny unflinchingly, and displayed a courage worthy of a better cause. He was pale with apprehension, for he well knew, in spite of his bravado, that he was in a tight place. But the crimson hue of the light filtering through the shade threw a delicate glow on his finely cut face. Facing the two gentlemen, who knew him past all denial to be a scoundrel, he looked as handsome a lad as ever stepped in shoe leather. It seemed a terrible pity that so fair an outside should mask such internal evil. Something of this sort occurred to Vernon as he stepped back with a sigh. "I wish you were as decent a fellow as you look," he said in a regretful voice. "In Heaven's name, Maunders, why can't you be an honest man? You have a handsome face, a fine figure, you have had the best education England can offer, and you hold a good position in the social world. Finally, your aunt, Miss Bedge, who adopted you as her son, loves you dearly, and if you have not sufficient self-respect to keep straight for your own sake, you might behave like an honest gentleman for hers." Maunders might have been moved by this discourse, or he might not. At all events, he showed little signs of feeling on his classic face. "It's all very well your talking," he said sullenly, and looking down, a trifle ashamed, if indeed he could be said to display any emotion, "but I have been brought up to live like a prince. I have the tastes of a duke and the income of a pauper, so I must gratify my fancies somehow. I am no more proud of having had to take to fortune telling for my bread and butter than you are in setting up as a private detective. Neither business is respectable, but the law can say nothing to you or me." "Nothing to me, certainly," Vernon assured him coldly, "since I am, and always have been, on the side of justice. Your fortune telling may be innocent enough in the main, since you prefer wringing money from silly people instead of taking up a good business, but it's your connection with The Spider that is dangerous to you." "I am not The Spider, and I have no connection with the beast." "In that case, how comes it that The Spider offers to place Lady Corsoon in possession of her niece's fortune on condition that she permits you to marry Miss Corsoon?" The Colonel uttered an ejaculation of mingled wrath and horror, and Maunders grew a shade paler. "Is that true?" Towton demanded with a look of loathing at Maunders, and then an inquiring glance at Vernon. "Perfectly true," was the response. "I did not intend to say anything to you, Colonel, since the affair is a private one of Lady Corsoon's, but it seems necessary to be frank even at the risk of exposing a lady's secrets, as much as I hate to do so. Lady Corsoon received an offer from The Spider to return certain jewels which she pawned to pay her bridge losses, and which he obtained possession of by means of forged pawn tickets on condition that she should pay £1,000. Afterwards another letter was received saying that he would take £10,000, a single year's income of Miss Dimsdale's, and would place Lady Corsoon in possession of the fortune. She was to pay the money and consent to the marriage of our friend here with Miss Corsoon. How do you explain this interest which The Spider takes in you, Maunders, if you don't know him?" The culprit moistened his dry lips and replied with insolent boldness, "I wrote the letter to Lady Corsoon myself.
That is, the second letter. I know nothing about the first." "Then you are The Spider!" cried Towton fiercely. "No, don't run your head against a wall," retorted Maunders coolly, and fighting for every inch of the disputed ground. "Lady Corsoon told me about the first letter and the threat. I advised her to consult Vernon in his character of Nemo, and did him a good turn." "And yourself a better," said Vernon scornfully. "You hoped that Lady Corsoon, on learning my employment, would forbid me to think of her daughter." "Yes, I did. However, I sent her to you to do business. Then I thought, as she was committed so far with The Spider, that there would be no harm in my trying to get her on my side, so that I might marry Lucy. I knew that Ida was not entitled to the fortune, as there is no will, and she was not old Dimsdale's daughter. I also knew that Lady Corsoon was kept short by her husband and would like to have her own money, if only to pay The Spider and recover the jewels so as to hide her fault from Sir Julius. For this reason I wrote the letter asking that Lady Corsoon should aid me to marry her daughter." "And you asked for £10,000 also," said Towton wrathfully. "Only 1 year's income of the Dimsdale investments," retorted Maunders with great coolness. "A man must have some money for his honeymoon." "And when Lady Corsoon died you guessed that your wife, which she never will be, you can rest assured, would inherit the whole Dimsdale fortune." "Quite so. I thought of everything. I suppose Lady Corsoon showed you the second letter as well as the first in your character of Nemo?" "You are correct," replied Vernon with great composure, "and I noted that the second letter, like the first, was signed with the ideograph of The Spider." "Naturally it would be," said Maunders with a shrug. "I easily had an india rubber stamp made. The thing, if done, had to be well done." "You are a blackguard," said Colonel Towton, much disgusted. "And may I ask," requested Vernon with irony, "how many other people you have blackmailed by using this stamp?" "None. Nor did I blackmail Lady Corsoon. I simply made a suggestion." "On the threat of telling her husband about her gambling and the sale of the family jewels." "The Spider used that argument first," said Maunders sullenly. "I simply endorsed it." "I heartily believe that you are the scoundrel himself," snapped Towton. "I swear I am not. Why, even my mother was blackmailed, my adopted mother, that is, on the plea that she is my real mother. Would I have done such a thing as that?" "You would do anything to gain your own ends," said Vernon coldly, "always provided your villainy is not discovered." Maunders grew furiously scarlet. "At least I would have spared my aunt. Mrs. Bedge would give me her last sixpence. In my character as her adopted son there was no need for me to attempt blackmail." "Perhaps there was not. But all this does not explain how you came to communicate the secret of Dimsdale to The Spider." "I didn't communicate it, and how he managed to learn it I can't say." "How did you become possessed of it?" asked Towton very directly. "I shan't tell you. And I'm not going to be ragged any longer. If I'd guessed for one moment that you were in this house I would not have put in an appearance." "I can well believe that," said Vernon coldly. "It's not that I'm afraid," Maunders hastily assured him. "As Diabella I have done nothing to which the law can take exception. The assaults on you and the Colonel were brought about by your own damned meddling and by the fidelity of Hokar, but I have given up playing Diabella." "Because you feared lest we should have you arrested," said Towton shrewdly. "No. Had I been afraid I should never have appeared at the bazaar." "Oh, yes, you would. You pretended to leave London so as to provide an alibi in case of danger," said Vernon quietly, "and you did not think that Colonel Towton would be at the bazaar. Seeing me didn't matter, as you did not know that Towton and myself were working together. And when I think of the infernal rubbish you told me—" "It was your own fault," said Maunders sulkily, "and I've had enough of this, so I'm off." He moved towards the door, but Towton sprang forward and caught his arm. "If you leave this room you will be handed over to the police," he declared. "He will be handed over in any case," said Vernon decisively. Maunders turned ghastly pale and his knees shook. He was beginning to lose the courage which carried him so far successfully. "Vernon, you would not disgrace your old friend," he pleaded piteously. "You're no friend of mine," was the stern reply, "and your sole chance of escape from arrest is to reveal how you learned this secret of Dimsdale's. If I tell it, will you let me leave this house free?"
"No, I shan't. I intend to keep an eye on you until this mystery of The Spider is cleared up. You are his jackal." "I am not. I know nothing. I refuse to speak." "Colonel, go out and fetch a policeman." "No, no, no, no!" almost shrieked the wretched man, and flung himself on his knees. "Arthur, don't! I swear I'm innocent. I know nothing of Dimsdale's murder." "Stand up, you cur, and speak out," said Vernon, more enraged by his exhibition of weakness than he had been by the man's insolence. "How did you learn this secret of Dimsdale's? Is it true or a lie?" "It is true. It is true. I swear it is true. Oh, don't call in the police." Maunders still grovelled and clung to the knees of Vernon with such force that the young man could not get away. Outside, the fog had rolled right up to the single window of the apartment, and the livid look of the atmosphere suited the situation much better than did the calm, rosy light of the lamp. Near the door knelt Maunders, weeping piteously and begging that the police might not be called in. Vernon stood silent, but Towton gave vent to an oath at the unmanly demeanour of the detected scoundrel. "Who told you the secret?" he demanded fiercely. "I insist upon knowing, and if you don't tell I'll call the police myself. A cur such as you are should be under lock and key." "Come, Maunders," said Vernon sternly. "Who told you?" "Miss Jewin. She knew Dimsdale in India and Burma," snuffled the kneeling man, desperately afraid. "Who is Miss Jewin?" "Hest's housekeeper at Gerby." "What?" Both men uttered the ejaculation simultaneously and looked at one another. Then ensued a silence, while the fog closed thicker and darker, and only the weeping of Maunders could be heard. Suddenly from the hall came the sound of the door opening, and then a firm footstep. Maunders gave a wild cry and clung vehemently to Vernon's legs. "It's Hest! It's Hest! He'll kill me for telling." "Then Hest is the—" "Yes, he's the Spider, and—" The door was flung open as the footsteps paused, and Francis Hest, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, stood in the threshold smiling. Maunders beat the ground with his hand and crawled to the newcomer's feet. "I couldn't help it. I had to tell you were—" "The Spider!" cried Vernon, whipping out his revolver. "I arrest you—" He got no further. At the words of Maunders the villain's face had changed with the rapidity of lightning from smiles to desperate anger. He cast a furious look on his accomplice, then suddenly lowered his head so as to get under the line of fire. The next moment Vernon felt Hest charge him head downward in the stomach. The revolver shot harmlessly to the roof, while the young man, taken by surprise, was dashed against the Colonel. Both men fell in a confused heap. "Follow, you devil!" cried Hest, kicking Maunders, still on his knees, and then he rushed out of the door. Maunders leaped up to race for his liberty, and closed the door behind him. When the Colonel and Vernon got on their feet again they rushed to the hall to find it empty. The front door had crashed to with a noise like thunder, and they heard it being locked on the outside, to the accompaniment of a triumphal laugh. "We've lost them!" cried Vernon, tugging vainly at the door. "They'll get away easily in the fog." End of Chapter 15. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California.